This is chapter 2, To Make Death Love Us. It was early morning when the carnival hit the crossroads collection of shacks, general store, cafe, and gas station, a small place without even a name to be remembered. The entire troupe was bone weary from traveling all night and the emptiness in their bellies. Paulette complained the most. She'll be complaining one hell of a lot more, Will thought, when I tell her there's no money for breakfast and she'll have to eat out of cans for her meal. The few bucks they'd scraped up in the last town of any size had gone for gas and oil. Not all of it. The rest had gone into the pocket of a gambler in a roadside tavern. The gambler had smiled wider, and his hands had moved faster than Will's. Of course, they both had been cheating, and everybody knew it, but the gambler had been a much better cheater. Will might have got some of it back as he had done in the past, except that Marco was off asleep somewhere, and the town sharpie had a lot of his heavy-set, red-necked friends hanging around. So now it was dead broke in a morning crossroads and hope for a penny. As soon as the truck pulled to a stop, Paulette hurried off as soon as she could waddle to relieve herself. Serena, the moonchild, followed more slowly. Marco went off to look for any heavy manual labor chores that could buy a loaf of bread and top off the gas tank. Colonel John, the midget, went along with the strong man to speak for him. Will and Peppino, the rubber man, went into the cafe. The screen door, which was holed through and kept out only the most stupid of flies, slammed shut behind them. Christ, Will thought. I'd never ask for another thing if I just never had to hear another goddamn screen door slam shut on another empty morning. They each took a seat on the cracked leatherette stools, and Will reached over for a well-stained menu. He fingered it in a thoughtful way. What'll it be? The counterman asked without enthusiasm. Can I tell you the truth? Will said, and he smiled the way he did when he wanted something. The counterman swatted a fly, smashing it on the greasy countertop. He scraped the bloody mess off the surface of the counter with the edge of the fly swatter. Will looked up from the menu, the beguiling smile still in place. Can I tell you the truth? I already know it, the counterman finally admitted, chewing on a bedraggled toothpick. Will frowned. Well then, that is perfectly marvelous. Maybe I could ask you to join up with us. It was not a serious offer. Nah, I get a full belly right where I am. Not like some folks. The man looked at Will with little pig eyes, waiting for the inevitable story. Waiting, but not particularly interested. He'd heard them all anyway, every con in the book. Will touched Peppino on his back. You ever see anything the like of this? Show him a little something, Peppino. The rubber man seemed to melt where he sat, arms becoming liquid, his limbs curling in the most extraordinary way, setting the stool spinning beneath him. Tell him not to break the goddamn seat, the counterman said. Now what's that worth? Will asked. Not a goddamn thing. Show him another trick, Peppino. Will's smile was wearing a trifle thin. Shove your tricks. They won't buy you nothing here, said the counterman, folding his arms across his chest. The man looked up at the banging sound of the screen door, and his mouth fell open about halfway to his belly button. God Almighty! He was staring at Paulette in the doorway. It was a double door. Even so, she was making it an effort to squeeze through. Jesus H. Particular Christ. I thought my Aunt Hattie was fat, but I never seen the like of that one. Paulette made it through the door and moved over to the soft drink case. It was the only thing in the room big enough for her to sit down on. Will tugged at his chin thoughtfully. Almost shyly, he said, Now what's that worth to you? The man, however, wasn't listening. He was staring with no lessening wonder at Serena. She stood in the doorway, framed there in the morning light, looking like something that had escaped from the land of dwarves, trolls, and fairies. She looks like a big white rabbit, breathed the man. The fly swatter dropped from his hand. He glanced back at Paulette, who, with the incredible nimbleness for one her size, hoisted herself up on the soft drink case and smiled ecstatically, as though she could feel the coolness beneath her through her bloomers. Are you over by the gentleman who was talking, Will? Serena said in her honeyed voice. It was not really a question. She already knew. I'm here, darling. Come along. There's nothing in between. Serena walked hesitantly across the floor, unafraid but careful. God Almighty, the man said again. It wasn't bad enough that Serena had been born an albino, with no pigment in her skin and hair. Not curse enough to be born with moon-pale eyes, and gone blind to boot. The real horror was that nature had given her a beautiful face. It had given her a long, graceful neck, like a column of shimmering talc, and gave her a pair of breasts like white, downy peaches, and arms that were so graceful, along with perfectly formed hands at the ends of them, made you want to weep. Because that's where it all stopped. From the hips down, her legs were stunted, misshapen, and thin as rails. The little baby shoes she wore on her feet made it all seem the more horrible somehow. Now what's that worth to you, you cold-hearted son of a bitch? Said Will in the softest of voices, so that the man couldn't really hear it at all. He said it in a way that blamed the man for Serena and what she was. Serena came over to the counter and sat down gracefully upon a stool. The counterman stared at her some more and then looked at Will. The counterman hadn't been born yesterday. His eyes grew hard as marbles. You got some money to pay for breakfast? No? Then get the hell out of my place, said the man, returning to himself and to what he was. Oh, it's yours, is it? Mighty lucky man. Pretty well set up, you are. Other people, said Will pointedly, are not so lucky. See here, I'll make you a bargain. Both parties have to have something to make a bargain. Will handed Serena the menu. This poor girl can't see. She's blind as a stone. You don't believe it? Test her any way you want to. Light a match and poke it in her eye. Go on, urged Will. The man shook his head. Then if you believe me, I'm going to show you a most wondrous thing. You think this poor creature's been put upon by the Lord? Well, she has, that's clear enough. But he gave her a gift for the mistake he made in the fashion of her, the tips of her beautiful fingers. The man looked down at Serena's hands, and beautiful they were. The tips of her beautiful fingers are so sensitive that she can read print with them. Not raised print like they make for the blind. No, sir, not those little dots. No, sir. Common old print of the page, newspaper, book, or this menu she holds in her hand. Now the bargain's this, and here Will came alive with new energy, for this was what he was all about. If she can read the menu with only the tips of her beautiful fingers, will you stand 6 poor wayfarers to a decent meal? 6? 6 of you? Echoed the man stupidly. Colonel John the Midget walked in with Marco the strong man. There was a frown on his face. Nobody out back in the garage, said the midget. Well, that's all right, Colonel John, Will said. This lucky man here owns the whole kit and caboodle, I'll just bet. The counterman was looking at the midget now, though the colonel was far less a wonder, almost a commonplace, after what he had seen so far. Will you do it, friend? Said Will, his voice like honey as it poured from his tongue. And besides, we'll do what chores we can around here until noon. Paulette and Serena do marvelous needlework. Marco, the strong man there, and me can do some heavy cleaning up. And the colonel, small as he is, can lend a hand. What say, friend? Would you see this wonder or no? The man nodded dumbly. Have her read it. Serena ran her fingers over the menu, hesitating here and there over a grease stain or a bit of dried mustard. Then, in a clear, sweet voice, she read off without mistakes the man's refreshment list to him. The counterman nodded again, like a stupid puppet with a broken headstring. His eyes were wide with uncomprehending wonder. All right, then, I'll feed you, but first I gotta get the kids up to see this. Hell, it's like having our own damn private circus. He pulled his apron off and disappeared through the swinging door alongside the grill, and they could hear him rousing his young ones in an excited, festive voice. Will Carney smiled all around to let his charges know that he'd taken care of them, once again. The truck shuddered as some loose rock peppered it from above, and Will liked to wet himself. Save us, damn it, save us. He half laughed because he thought he heard someone ask, "Why?" Now that was a question, wasn't it? Why? "In the name of the juggler," he whispered to himself. The counterman had come back and started slapping bacon and eggs on the griddle. He kept glancing wondering glances back at one and all. Now that he was paying for them, he wanted to enjoy all of the sight of them that he could. Then the swinging door opened, and 3 sleepy girls, dressed in the shifts they slept in, came stumbling into the cafe. Did they pull up short? They were dumbfounded and opened their mouths just like their daddy did, the better perhaps to catch unwary flies. Will's own mouth dropped an inch before he laid on his best grin. One of the brute's daughters, late in her teens, was as pretty as sin and just as willing. She caught Will's secret grin, meant only for her, and the wanting behind it. She batted her eyes and flicked her little tongue out to wet her lips suggestively. She smiled back in such a way that Will knew he had only to find the place and the privacy. Oh, yes, how good days did sometimes follow bad, and deadly nights, peaceful ones as well. Serena, the blind albino, lived a secret life inside herself. Inside, in that strange and fragile dream house that was her mind, she was a being of great and seldom used power. This great power came to her unasked, caught her quite by surprise. At first, it was only a dream, but like all dreams, it contained the idea of death. It was a power that never came to her in any other fashion than as a dream, yet it grew, taking on a life, almost a reality, of its own. And it was a powerful dream, a gentle dream, an understanding dream, and sometimes, when she willed it, a fatal one. Yes, fatal. For with it, this gentlest of all gentle creatures had killed and would kill again. That was a certainty. For what was power if it was not meant to be used? Blind, loving Serena made a strange executioner. The first death she dreamed into being was more an act of kindness than murder, even if it was her own father. Serena was born in Baltimore, Maryland, once called the City of White Steps, because it had been the special pride of the good housewives in the old town to sweep and scrub with soap and brush the stone porches, sidewalks, and even the cobblestone streets. She was raised in one of the better neighborhoods. Lace curtains enhanced the tall windows of the row houses built in another and better age. Each house had trees, carefully ringed with white painted wrought iron cages, planted opposite the front door. The doors themselves were freshly painted each year and were rich with shining brass. The houses were many-roomed, elegantly appointed, and clustered together in an architectural ring of beauty, a haven for the well-to-do, besieged, surrounded on all sides by zones of vice and human misery. The black ghetto engulfed this fading world of yesterday's elegance. Not all at once, but gradually, with each passing year. Indirectly, this slow transition abetted the death of Serena's father. With the passage of time, the cobblestones were tarred over to make better surfaces for the automobile. The horses and carriages that had once thundered down the streets were gone. With the coming of war upon war, the wrought iron cages and gates were torn up in patriotic zeal and offered for scrap. The world changed, got older and tired, and the white stone of old Baltimore grew gray, and the sidewalks fell into disrepair. Once gracious houses were broken up into tenements. All the grace and majesty of what had gone before disappeared under the grinding hell of poverty, under the terrible reality of life in the Black Ghetto. In the very heart of this ghetto, there stood a strong anachronism, a single house which withstood the ravages wrought by the jungle of the city. In this house, which would soon know murder, the world outside seldom entered. Its windows were still veiled with delicate lace curtains in a pattern of bluebirds holding cartouches of ribbons in their beaks. The boot scraper at the door was painted shining black, and the stone steps were freshly painted white every 3 months.